How to learn to think positively. 10 Buddhist lessons. To learn to think positively is not simply to force the mind into optimism or to repeat cheerful phrases that temporarily mask deeper emotional storms. In the Buddhist understanding, positive thinking is a profound transformation of perception itself. It is the ability to look at reality without distortion, without the chains of fear, attachment and aversion that normally color our experiences. Thinking positively means developing the clarity to recognize that suffering arises not from events themselves, but from the way the mind interprets them. It implies a shift from automatic reactivity to conscious awareness, from depending on external conditions for peace to cultivating peace as an internal, unshakable source. In the modern world, many people attempt to think positively by denying their struggles, numbing their pain, or escaping into fantasies of a perfect life. But Buddhism teaches that true positive thinking is not escapism. It is the result of training the mind to meet each moment with wisdom, equanimity, and compassion. Instead of running from discomfort, we learn to transform it. Instead of fighting what we cannot change, we learn to soften into acceptance. Instead of collapsing under pressure, we learn to observe our thoughts as passing clouds rather than permanent realities. This text explores 5 deep topics inspired by 10 Buddhist lessons on positive thinking. Each topic will unfold as a long, continuous reflection, revealing how inner transformation takes place not through belief alone, but through practice, observation, and an honest confrontation with the patterns that imprison us. Positive thinking, from this perspective, is not the product of wishful dreams, but the fruit of mental discipline. To train the mind is to train life itself, because everything you experience happens inside. You cannot shape the world until you have shaped the way you perceive the world. We will examine how the mind creates suffering through habitual narratives, how awareness dissolves negative cycles, how acceptance becomes the gateway to peace, how compassion opens the heart to deeper joy, and how presence restructures the entire architecture of thought. These lessons draw from ancient Buddhist insights, but are presented in a contemporary voice, designed to illuminate the kind of strength that remains stable even when circumstances are unstable. Let us begin with the first topic, which deals with the foundation of all Buddhist psychology, understanding the mind. The mind creates the world you see. How Buddhism teaches you to transform your inner narrative. To understand how to think positively, you must first understand something crucial. The mind is not a passive observer of reality, but an active creator of it. Not in a mystical sense where thoughts instantly transform the physical world, but in a deeper psychological sense, where the world you experience is filtered through your interpretations, beliefs, and emotional patterns. 2 people can live the same event, and yet have completely different reactions, because each sees the world through the lens of their conditioning. Buddhism teaches that this conditioning is the source of suffering, but also the key to liberation. If the mind creates your experience, then through training the mind you can transform that experience at the deepest level. From birth onward, the mind accumulates impressions, praise and criticism, trauma and affection, fear and encouragement. Each experience becomes a seed that shapes how you perceive later moments. Without awareness, the seeds sprout into automatic thoughts that run your life without your consent. A person who grew up feeling inadequate may interpret neutral events as attacks or failures. A person conditioned to fear uncertainty may interpret opportunities as threats. A person trained to seek constant approval may interpret silence as rejection. These interpretations create suffering not because the world is inherently hostile, but because the mind has not yet learned to relate to reality with clarity. Positive thinking cannot emerge from a mind trapped in these patterns. It cannot grow in soil dominated by fear, resentment, self-doubt, or attachment. Therefore, the first Buddhist lesson for positive thinking is understanding the nature of the mind and how it constructs the narrative of your life. Only when you can observe your thoughts without identifying with them do you begin to reshape that narrative into something healthy, empowering, and peaceful. Buddhist teachings emphasize that thoughts are not facts. They are mental events, arising and passing, shaped by past impressions. Yet people treat their thoughts as unquestionable truths. If a thought says, "You are not good enough," they believe it. If a thought says, "This situation will end badly," they surrender to fear. If a thought says, "Nothing ever works for you," the mind collapses into hopelessness. But the moment you recognize that thoughts are simply phenomena arising within awareness, your relationship with them changes. Instead of being controlled by them, you learn to witness them. Instead of drowning in them, you learn to let them flow without resistance. To think positively, you must first slow down enough to observe what the mind is doing. Most people never do this. They live in a constant rush, reacting to every stimulus without noticing the thought patterns driving their reactions. One small setback can trigger a chain reaction of negative interpretations. One mistake leads to self-criticism, which leads to discouragement, which leads to paralysis. But in truth, the setback was not the cause of suffering. The suffering arose from the meaning the mind assigned to it. If someone fails at a task, the objective event is simple. An attempt did not produce the expected result, but the mind interprets it emotionally. I failed again. I am incompetent. I will always fail. I should not even try. These interpretations are illusions, created by fear and conditioning. Yet they feel real because they are repeated so often that they become internal truths. The Buddhist path invites you to examine these interpretations with honesty and curiosity. Instead of accepting them blindly, you ask, is this thought true? Is it absolute? Does it define me? Is it permanent? Does it serve my growth? Most negative thoughts collapse under this kind of scrutiny. They are fragile constructions, held together only by repetition. The moment you shine awareness on them, they lose their power. To transform your inner narrative, you must also recognize that the mind loves exaggeration. It magnifies small inconveniences into major problems. It imagines future catastrophes that have no basis in reality. It creates mental dramas that never materialize. Someone might think, if I lose this job, my life will fall apart. Yet countless people rebuild their lives after losing jobs. Another might think, if this person rejects me, it means I am unlovable, ignoring the fact that rejection often has nothing to do with personal worth. The mind creates stories, and those stories either support your well-being or sabotage it. Positive thinking requires you to rewrite these stories consciously, but rewriting does not mean denying reality. It means interpreting reality in a balanced, grounded, and wise way. Instead of exaggerating threats, you learn to see challenges as opportunities. Instead of focusing on what is missing, you learn to appreciate what is present. Instead of clinging to negative possibilities, you learn to open yourself to positive ones. Instead of repeating old fears, you learn to cultivate new perspectives. This transformation is not instant. It requires discipline, self-observation, and patience. It requires the courage to confront the darkest corners of your mind. It requires willingness to let go of familiar narratives, even when they are painful, because the ego often clings to suffering simply because it is known. Many people prefer the discomfort they understand over the freedom they fear. The mind resists change because change threatens its illusion of control. To think positively, you must become aware of this resistance. The mind will insist that negative thoughts are realistic and positive thoughts are naive. But realism without wisdom is just pessimism disguised as intelligence. Buddhism teaches that reality is neutral. It is the mind that labels it good or bad. Thus, the goal is not to replace negative illusions with positive illusions, but to dissolve illusions altogether and see clearly. And when you see clearly, positivity arises naturally, not as a forced attitude, but as the outcome of understanding. There is also a crucial Buddhist insight. The mind cannot hold two opposite states simultaneously. A mind filled with gratitude cannot harbor resentment at the same time. A mind filled with compassion cannot sustain hatred. A mind centered in the present cannot be overwhelmed by fear of the future. Therefore, cultivating positive states is not merely about suppressing negative ones, but about creating inner conditions where negativity cannot survive. One practice for this is observing the breath. Although it seems simple, it trains the mind to notice without reacting. Watching the breath teaches you to stay in the present moment, the only place where life actually happens. When the mind is anchored in the present, it becomes harder for negative narratives to arise because most negativity comes from the past or the future. Regret belongs to the past. Anxiety belongs to the future. Only peace belongs to the present. Another practice is labeling thoughts. When a negative thought arises, instead of believing it, you can say internally, "This is fear," or "This is doubt," or "This is anger." By naming the thought, you separate yourself from it. You are no longer the thought. You are the awareness observing the thought. This simple shift weakens the emotional charge and opens space for a positive response. Positive thinking also requires acceptance, not resignation, but acceptance of the present moment as it is. When you resist reality, you generate suffering. When you accept it, you free yourself to act wisely. Someone might think this situation should not be happening, but the situation is already happening. Resistance wastes mental energy that could be used for constructive change. Acceptance allows clarity, and clarity allows effective action. Compassion is another essential ingredient. Negative thoughts often arise from harsh self-judgment. Compassion softens this judgment. It reminds you that you are human, that you are allowed to make mistakes, that growth requires gentleness. A compassionate mind is naturally more positive because it does not attack itself internally. Self-compassion does not mean avoiding responsibility. It means engaging with responsibility without cruelty. To think positively, you must also train the mind to recognize impermanence. Every situation changes, every emotion passes, every difficulty contains the seeds of transformation. When you truly understand impermanence, you stop clinging to negative states because you know they will not last. You also stop clinging to positive states because you understand they too will change. This understanding creates equanimity, the balanced state that Buddhism considers the highest form of positive thinking. Finally, cultivating positive thinking requires living with intention. You cannot let the mind run on autopilot. You must decide what kind of thoughts you want to cultivate and reinforce them through consistent practice. If you want gratitude, practice gratitude. If you want patience, practice patience. If you want clarity, practice meditation. Each intention plants a seed, and over time these seeds grow into a new way of experiencing life. In summary, the mind creates your world, and by transforming the mind, you transform your world. This is the foundation of positive thinking in Buddhism. Not blind optimism, not denial of pain, but a deep restructuring of perception that allows you to walk through life with clarity, resilience, and inner peace. Please subscribe to the channel to support this work and continue receiving teachings like this. The mind does not find peace in the future. How the present moment becomes the foundation of positive thinking. The deepest misunderstanding most people carry is the belief that peace will come later. They imagine that life will finally feel stable when the job changes, when the relationship improves, when money arrives, when health returns, when recognition is earned, when old wounds are healed, or when circumstances fall perfectly into place. This belief is universal, but according to Buddhism, it is also one of the greatest illusions the mind creates. The idea that peace exists somewhere in the future keeps the mind in a perpetual state of dissatisfaction, chasing moments that never fully arrive. This illusion sabotages positive thinking at its core because it places happiness outside the present moment, conditioning the mind to see the now as inadequate. Positive thinking cannot grow in soil that is constantly rejecting the present. When the Buddha spoke of suffering, he emphasized that suffering arises not from life itself, but from the mind's relationship to life. One of the clearest examples of this is the way the mind becomes trapped in future fantasies or future fears. The moment the mind believes peace is somewhere ahead, it becomes restless in the present. It becomes anxious, impatient, needy, dissatisfied. It tells itself, I will feel good when things improve, yet things are always in flux, so peace is always just out of reach. A person may say, when I earn more, I will finally relax, but once more is earned, the mind wants even more. Someone else may think, when I find love, I will finally feel complete, but even in love, insecurity arises. Another might think, when I fix all my problems, life will be perfect. But the truth is that new problems always emerge. This cycle continues endlessly. Buddhist philosophy reveals that the mind, when untrained, is incapable of resting in the present moment. It constantly projects itself forward, either worrying about what might happen or longing for what it hopes will happen. The future becomes a psychological refuge where the mind imagines a perfected version of life, free from the challenges and imperfections of the now. The problem with this refuge is that it does not exist. Life only unfolds in the present moment. The mind's attempts to escape into the future are futile, yet it continues to try, generation after generation, lifetime after lifetime. To cultivate positive thinking, you must understand this dynamic deeply. Positive thinking is not merely seeing the world in a good light. It's learning to stabilize the mind in the only moment where peace is possible, the present. When you learn to stay with the now, the mind's tendency to exaggerate fears or create imaginary problems weakens. The mind becomes less reactive, less anxious, less overwhelmed. Negative thinking relies heavily on time, specifically the future. Without the future, negative thinking loses much of its power. Consider how much suffering emerges from imagining what could go wrong. Fear is almost always directed toward the future. When someone feels anxious, they are rarely reacting to something happening in the present. They are reacting to something that might happen later. The mind projects its insecurities forward and creates frightening possibilities. The person then suffers emotionally, as if those possibilities were real, but none of them have occurred. They are mental projections, illusions, shadows cast on the walls of consciousness. Without training, the mind treats these shadows as threats. Similarly, dissatisfaction arises from imagining a better future. Instead of appreciating the present, the mind fixates on what it lacks. It tells itself life will be good when this or that changes, which creates a constant feeling of inadequacy. The present becomes a stepping stone to a future the mind idealizes but never reaches. The more the mind chases this perfect future, the more it rejects the now, and by rejecting the now, the mind rejects life itself. The Buddha taught that craving is the root of suffering. Most people understand craving as desire for physical pleasure or material wealth, but a deeper interpretation of craving is the craving for a different moment than the one you are currently experiencing. When the mind craves another moment, It cannot inhabit the present fully. It feels that something is missing, but what is missing is not external. What is missing is the ability to be here. Positive thinking requires developing the ability to stay here, in the present, without running away mentally or emotionally. The present moment is not always comfortable, but it is the only place where transformation occurs. When you fully inhabit the present, the mind cannot create imaginary problems. The mind cannot distort reality as easily. The mind becomes still enough to see clearly. And clear seeing is the birth of wisdom, which is the foundation of positive thinking. Without wisdom, positive thinking becomes fragile, unstable, easily destroyed by circumstances. But when positive thinking is rooted in awareness of the present moment, it becomes unshakable. One of the main obstacles preventing people from living in the present is resistance. The mind resists what it does not want to feel, experience, or confront. If there is discomfort, the mind escapes into the future. If there is uncertainty, the mind escapes into fantasy. If there is emotional pain, the mind escapes into distraction. This resistance to the present is a form of unconscious rejection. The mind is rejecting reality because it has not learned how to stay with reality without fear. This rejection creates tension, stress, and negativity. The mind interprets the present moment as a threat because it does not know how to remain here without trying to change it. Buddhist practice teaches us to soften resistance through acceptance. Acceptance does not mean passivity. It does not mean you agree with everything that is happening. It means you acknowledge that this moment is the way it is. When you accept the present moment, even if it is challenging, you allow the mind to relax. You remove the inner conflict between what is and what the mind thinks should be. This relaxation opens the door to positive thinking because it creates space for clarity. A mind that resists cannot think positively because it is too busy fighting reality. Negative thinking is often a symptom of inner conflict. When the mind is at war with the present, it interprets everything through a lens of frustration. The person becomes more irritated, more impatient, more reactive. They begin to see problems everywhere. Their mind becomes like a tight fist, clenched around its own expectations. Positive thinking requires the opposite: an open hand, a relaxed mind, a willingness to meet life as it comes. Another root of negative thinking related to the future is the illusion of control. The mind believes it can control outcomes if it thinks about them enough. It worries because it believes worry will somehow prevent the worst from happening. It imagines because it believes imagination will prepare it for every possibility. But this need for control is itself a form of suffering. The world is not controllable in the way the mind desires. The future is inherently uncertain. Positive thinking becomes possible only when you release the need to control the future, and instead learn to respond wisely to the present. In Buddhist teachings, mindfulness is the antidote to this struggle. Mindfulness is the practice of bringing attention to what is happening right now, without judgment. When you become mindful, you begin to see your thoughts clearly. You notice how often they drift toward the future. You notice how often they create fear, guilt, expectation, or desire. You notice how these thoughts color your emotions. This noticing alone begins to weaken negative thinking because awareness dissolves unconsciousness. When the mind is not observed, it becomes chaotic. When the mind is observed, it becomes orderly. The simple act of noticing thoughts reduces their power. The mind thrives on unconscious momentum, but mindfulness interrupts that momentum. When awareness enters, thought slows down, becomes less dramatic, less convincing. Instead of being swept away by negative imagination, you begin to see imagination as imagination. You begin to see fear as fear, not as truth. Presence is not only the absence of mental noise, it is the opening of a deeper dimension of consciousness. In presence, you begin to feel the aliveness of life directly, without interpretation. You sense the breath, the body, the environment, the stillness underneath experience. This stillness becomes a refuge, a source of inner stability. From this stability, positive thinking arises naturally because the mind is no longer dominated by fear or craving. A present mind is a calm mind. A calm mind is a clear mind. A clear mind is capable of positive perception. People often believe positive thinking is about forcing optimistic thoughts, but true positive thinking is the result of removing the distortions of fear and desire that cloud perception. When the mind is present, it sees life as it is. It recognizes beauty in simple things. It appreciates what is available now instead of longing for what is missing. It becomes less reactive to challenges. It becomes more patient, more grounded, more resilient. These qualities are the natural expressions of awareness. A major hindrance to presence is the emotional residue people carry from their past. When unresolved emotions accumulate, they create tension that the mind tries to avoid by projecting itself into the future. Someone who carries unhealed wounds may feel unsafe in the present because the present triggers discomfort. So they escape into fantasies of a future where everything is better. But this escape only strengthens negative thinking because it prevents the person from dealing with what truly needs attention, the inner emotional layers that require healing. Positive thinking includes the willingness to face emotional discomfort without running. Buddhism teaches that pain is inevitable, but suffering is optional. Pain belongs to the body and to the flow of life. Suffering belongs to the mind's resistance. When you allow yourself to fully experience the present, even if it is painful, the pain moves through you and dissolves. When you resist it, the pain lingers and transforms into suffering. Positive thinking emerges from the capacity to experience the full range of life without contracting around it. Another obstacle to presence is mental overstimulation. Modern life floods the mind with distractions, information, noise, and constant stimulation. The mind becomes restless, seeking constant novelty. This restlessness makes it difficult to stay present. The mind becomes addicted to movement, unable to rest in stillness. But stillness is essential for positive thinking because it allows the mind to reset, to breathe, to rediscover its natural clarity. One of the simplest Buddhist practices for developing presence is observing sensations in the body. The body always exists in the present. It cannot exist in the past or future. When you bring attention to the body, the mind naturally settles. You feel the breath, the heartbeat, the weight of your body on the ground. These sensations anchor you. When the mind drifts into future thinking, returning to the body pulls you back into the now. Over time, this practice strengthens awareness and weakens negative thinking. In addition to bodily awareness, the practice of mindful speech helps cultivate presence. When you speak slowly, consciously, with intention, the mind becomes more grounded. Speaking is often unconscious, driven by habitual reactions. When you become mindful of speech, you reduce negativity because you become aware of the emotional energy behind your words. You notice when your words come from fear, anger, insecurity, or frustration. This awareness helps you choose speech that aligns with positive thinking rather than reinforces negativity. Mindful listening is equally important. Listening deeply, without planning what to say, brings the mind into presence. Most people listen while thinking about their response. This prevents them from hearing fully and creates mental tension. Deep listening is a form of meditation. It opens the heart, softens judgment, and strengthens compassion. Compassion naturally dissolves negative thinking because it shifts the mind from self-centered patterns toward interconnectedness. Positive thinking also arises from the recognition of impermanence. When you understand deeply that everything is temporary, you stop clinging to what you want and resisting what you dislike. You begin to flow with life, instead of fighting it. This flowing creates inner peace, which supports positive perception. Impermanence also reduces anxiety about the future because you understand that the future is not fixed. You do not need to control everything. You only need to meet each moment with awareness and wisdom. One of the most transformative insights in Buddhism is that the present moment is complete as it is. Nothing is missing in the now. The mind creates the illusion of lack because it compares the present to an imagined future or an idealized past. When you stop comparing, you begin to see the fullness of the moment. Positive thinking grows from this fullness, not from wishing things were different. Gratitude is one of the most powerful tools for strengthening presence. Gratitude shifts the mind from what is missing to what is here. It trains the mind to recognize goodness. It reduces dissatisfaction. It opens the heart. When practiced daily, gratitude rewires neural pathways, making positive thinking more natural. Buddhism encourages gratitude not as forced optimism, but as a recognition of interdependence. Everything you have comes from countless conditions. Nothing exists in isolation. This understanding humbles the mind and generates appreciation. An additional aspect of presence is letting go. Letting go is not losing. It is freeing yourself from unnecessary mental burdens, letting go of expectations, letting go of judgments, letting go of grudges, letting go of fears, letting go of the idea that life should unfold in a specific way. When you let go, the mind becomes lighter. Positive thinking becomes easier because negativity has less to cling to. When the mind is present, thinking becomes clearer. Problems seem less overwhelming because you meet them one at a time instead of all at once. You make wiser decisions because you are not driven by fear or impulse. You communicate more peacefully. You cultivate patience. You appreciate small joys. You strengthen resilience. You develop inner stability. All these qualities contribute to positive thinking, but they all originate from presence. Presence also transforms relationships. When you are present, you stop projecting your fears onto others. You listen more deeply. You respond instead of react. You create space for understanding. This reduces conflict and increases harmony, which supports positive thinking by creating a peaceful environment. Presence is not something you achieve once and then keep forever. It is a practice, a returning again and again to the now. Some days it is easy, other days it is difficult, but each moment of returning strengthens awareness and weakens the mind's habitual negativity. Over time, the present becomes a familiar home instead of an uncomfortable place. You begin to enjoy simply being. This enjoyment is the foundation of true positive thinking. The mind learns to stop searching for happiness and instead discovers happiness in the act of being. You no longer postpone your life, waiting for better moments. You begin to see that the only moment you ever have is the one happening right now. This realization transforms your entire existence. Please subscribe to the channel to support this work and continue receiving teachings like this. The mind becomes what it repeats. How habitual thinking shapes reality and how Buddhism teaches you to break the cycle. Every thought you think leaves an imprint on the mind. This imprint, repeated over days, months, and years, becomes a mental habit, a pattern of perception that shapes how you experience yourself and the world. Buddhism teaches that the mind is like soft clay, constantly molded by the thoughts that flow through it. Whatever you repeat becomes easier to repeat. Whatever thoughts you nourish grow stronger. Whatever thoughts you ignore eventually weaken. This understanding is at the heart of Buddhist psychology and is essential for anyone who wants to learn how to think positively. Positive thinking is not a sudden transformation. It is the cumulative result of thousands of small mental actions, chosen intentionally and practiced consistently until they become second nature. To understand why this is true, You must first recognize that the mind is fundamentally programmable. Every habit you have, emotional, cognitive, or behavioral, was formed through repetition. No one is born with the habit of worrying, overthinking, criticizing themselves, expecting the worst, or imagining negative scenarios. These habits form because the mind repeats certain thoughts more often than others. A person who thinks about fear repeatedly becomes someone who fears easily. A person who practices gratitude repeatedly becomes someone who appreciates easily. A person who dwells on anger becomes easily angered. A person who reflects on kindness becomes naturally kind. The mind adapts to whatever you feed it. This is why Buddhism emphasizes the importance of right thought, right intention, and right mindfulness. These principles are not moral commandments, they are psychological truths. The quality of your thoughts determines the quality of your mind. The quality of your mind determines the quality of your life. If your habitual thinking is negative, fearful, or self-destructive, your experience of the world will reflect that negativity. You will interpret events pessimistically, assume the worst about situations, distrust your own abilities, and sabotage your own happiness. If your habitual thinking is grounded in clarity, compassion, and patience and presence, your life will feel fundamentally different. You will relate to challenges with calmness, see opportunities where others see obstacles, and cultivate a sense of inner well-being that is not dependent on external circumstances. However, habitual thought patterns are deeply rooted. Most people underestimate how powerful repetition is. A single negative thought may not affect you much, but 100 repetitions carve a groove into the mind. 1,000 repetitions create a pathway. 10,000 repetitions build a mental highway that your mind automatically travels. This is why people feel stuck in negativity even when they want to think positively. They are not failing at positive thinking. They are trapped in neural and emotional pathways that have been reinforced for years. The mind is doing exactly what it has been trained to do. Buddhism does not shame people for this. Instead, it teaches that the mind can always be retrained. No matter how deep the old grooves are, new grooves can be formed. Neuroplasticity, a term modern science uses, aligns perfectly with ancient Buddhist insight. The brain literally rewires itself according to what it practices. What you practice grows. What you neglect fades. The challenge is that the mind cannot simply delete old patterns. It must replace them. Trying to stop thinking negatively without replacing those thoughts with something healthier is like trying to stop breathing without inhaling new air. To change your habitual thinking, you must first become aware of what you habitually think. This alone is difficult. Most people are unaware of their mental habits because these habits operate unconsciously, like background noise. The mind repeats certain narratives so often that they feel natural, unquestioned, and even invisible. Someone who constantly thinks, "I am not good enough," might believe this thought is an objective fact. Someone who constantly imagines worst-case scenarios may think they are simply being realistic. Someone who constantly criticizes others may believe they are merely being observant. But these thought patterns are habits, not truths. Once awareness is present, transformation becomes possible. The next step is understanding the mechanics of repetition. Each time you think a thought, you strengthen the neural pathway associated with it. Each time you resist or replace that thought with a healthier alternative, you weaken the old pathway and strengthen a new one. This process is slow, but it is powerful. Over time, the new habit becomes stronger than the old one, and the mind begins to default to it automatically. This is how positive thinking becomes natural, not forced, not artificial, but the organic outcome of disciplined mental practice. One of the most common negative mental habits is self-judgment. People judge themselves harshly for mistakes, imperfections, or perceived inadequacies. This judgment may begin in childhood, perhaps through criticism or unrealistic standards imposed by family or society. Over time, self-judgment becomes automatic. A person may judge themselves before anyone else does. They may anticipate criticism even when none exists. They may interpret neutral events through a lens of inadequacy. This mental habit is corrosive. It drains confidence, prevents risk-taking, and undermines emotional resilience. Buddhism teaches that self-judgment arises from ignorance of our inherent worth, ignorance of the impermanence of flaws, ignorance of the interconnected nature of human experience. When you understand that mistakes are part of growth, that no self is fixed, and that suffering is universal, self-judgment begins to dissolve. But this understanding alone is not enough. It must be practiced repeatedly. Each time self-judgment arises, you must consciously respond with compassion instead of condemnation. You must replace the habitual thought with a new one. I am learning, I am growing, I am allowed to be imperfect, I am worthy of kindness. Over time, these new thoughts take root, and the mind begins to default toward compassion rather than criticism. Another common mental habit is catastrophizing, imagining worst-case scenarios, exaggerating problems, and anticipating disaster. This habit often stems from fear, insecurity, or past trauma. The mind believes that by imagining the worst, it can prepare for it. But the cost of this habit is enormous. It creates chronic stress, anxiety, and emotional exhaustion. It prevents people from taking opportunities because they fear what might go wrong. It destroys peace in the present moment because the mind is consumed by imagined futures. Buddhism teaches that catastrophizing arises from a misunderstanding of impermanence and a false sense of control. The mind wants certainty, but life is inherently uncertain. The more the mind tries to control the uncontrollable, the more anxious it becomes. The antidote to this is not forced optimism, but presence. When you bring your attention to what is happening now, you break the cycle of catastrophic thinking. The mind cannot simultaneously be present and imagine disaster. Presence interrupts the momentum of fear. But again, this must be practiced repeatedly until it becomes a habit. Each time the mind runs toward catastrophic thinking, you bring it back to the breath, the body, or the environment. You anchor yourself in reality instead of imagination. Over time, the mind learns to stay where life is actually happening. Another negative habit is comparison. The mind compares itself to others constantly. Skills, appearance, achievements, relationships, social status, financial success. Comparison creates envy, insecurity, resentment, and dissatisfaction. It convinces the mind that happiness depends on outperforming others or acquiring something others have. But comparison is a mental prison. No matter how much you achieve, there will always be someone with more. Buddhism teaches that comparison arises from ego, from clinging to an illusion of separateness. When you understand that all beings are interconnected, that each person is walking a unique path with distinct lessons, comparison becomes irrelevant. But to dissolve comparison, you must practice appreciation. Instead of comparing, appreciate the qualities you admire in others. Instead of resenting differences, honor them. And most importantly, appreciate your own journey. Every time comparison arises, consciously shift your attention to gratitude. This replacement, practiced consistently, weakens the habit of comparison. Yet another destructive mental habit is rumination, the constant replaying of past events, conversations, or mistakes. Rumination is an attempt by the mind to rewrite the past, find hidden meaning, or correct something that cannot be corrected. It drains energy, fuels depression, and prevents healing. Buddhism teaches that the past exists only as memory. Memory is not reality. It is a mental construct. When you ruminate, you become trapped in an illusion. The antidote is acceptance. Acceptance means acknowledging that the past cannot be changed. It means releasing the desire to rewrite what is already written. Acceptance is not passive, it is active surrender. It is choosing peace over mental struggle. Each time rumination arises, you gently return the mind to the present, not by force, but with compassion. This is how you break the cycle. But mental habits are not only negative, they can also be positive. You can cultivate habits that support peace, clarity, and emotional resilience. Gratitude is one of the most powerful positive habits because it shifts the mind's focus from what is lacking to what is present. When practiced daily, gratitude rewires the mind to notice goodness naturally. Compassion is another transformative habit. When you treat yourself and others with compassion, negativity loses its power. Compassion softens the mind, making it more receptive to positive thinking. Patience is also essential. Patience prevents reactive thinking and allows you to respond rather than react. Mindfulness is the foundation of all positive habits because it creates awareness, which is the doorway to choice. Without awareness, you cannot change your habits. With awareness, transformation becomes possible. Buddhism teaches that the mind becomes what it practices. If you practice fear, you become fearful. If you practice generosity, you become generous. If you practice resentment, you become resentful. If you practice calmness, you become calm. This is not metaphorical, it is literal. The mind reorganizes itself according to repetition. The challenge is that most people practice negative habits without realizing it. They rehearse their fears, relive their failures, repeat their insecurities, and reinforce their complaints. They do this daily, sometimes hourly. No wonder their minds become saturated with negativity. They have practiced negativity more than positivity. To break this cycle, you must consciously choose what to practice. This does not mean suppressing negative thoughts. Suppression strengthens them. It means recognizing negative thoughts as habits and choosing not to reinforce them. Each time a negative thought arises, you observe it, label it, and release it. You do not engage with it. You do not feed it. You do not believe it. This weakens the old habit. Then you consciously replace it with a thought aligned with clarity, compassion, and positivity. This strengthens the new habit. Over time, the new habit becomes stronger than the old one. This process is similar to training a muscle. If you have spent years strengthening the muscle of negativity, it will be strong. If you have rarely used the muscle of positivity, it will be weak. But with consistent training, the weak muscle becomes strong, and the strong muscle weakens. It is simply a matter of practice. This is why Buddhist monks train their minds daily through meditation, chanting, reflection, and mindfulness. They understand that the mind must be exercised just like the body. Without training, the mind becomes weak, chaotic, reactive, and easily controlled by fear. With training, it becomes strong, stable, resilient, and capable of positive thinking. There is a profound freedom that arises when you understand that your habitual thinking is not who you are. These thoughts are patterns, not identity. They were learned, not inherent, and anything learned can be unlearned. Most people mistakenly believe that their thoughts define them. They say, "This is just how I am." But Buddhism rejects this notion. The mind is not fixed. The self is not fixed. Everything changes. Everything can evolve. You are not your habits. You are the awareness that observes them. This awareness is free, spacious, and untouched by negativity. When you identify with awareness instead of with your thoughts, you loosen the grip of habitual thinking. This is the beginning of true liberation. Positive thinking, therefore, is not superficial optimism. It is the result of training the mind to interpret reality through clarity rather than fear, through compassion rather than judgment, through presence rather than imagination. It's the outcome of thousands of small choices made daily, moment to moment. It is the fruit of repetition. To integrate this Buddhist lesson fully, you must ask yourself, what am I practicing mentally every day? Am I practicing worry? Am I practicing gratitude? Am I practicing fear? Am I practicing patience? Am I practicing anger? Am I practicing compassion? Whatever you practice becomes your reality. The mind becomes what it repeats. So choose carefully, choose intentionally, choose thoughts that lead to peace, clarity, and freedom, not thoughts that imprison you. And remember, this process takes time. Be patient with yourself. Each new thought you choose is a step toward transformation. Please subscribe to the channel to support this work and continue receiving teachings like this. Transforming suffering through wisdom. How Buddhism teaches the mind to see challenges as pathways to positive thinking. Suffering is not merely something that happens to you. It is something the mind constructs around experience. Two people can go through the same event and have completely different emotional outcomes, because suffering is not found in the external conditions, but in the internal interpretation. Buddhism teaches that the root of suffering lies in ignorance, craving, and aversion, three mental forces that distort reality and prevent you from seeing life clearly. To think positively, therefore, you must learn to transform suffering at its root, not by denying its existence or pretending everything is pleasant, but by understanding the deeper mechanisms that generate suffering in the mind. When suffering is understood, it loses its power. When suffering is embraced with wisdom, it becomes a teacher rather than an enemy. When suffering is met with clarity, it becomes the very ground from which positive thinking grows. To begin this transformation, you must first understand that suffering is universal. No one escapes it. Not the wealthy, not the powerful, not the enlightened. The Buddha himself experienced loss, sickness, aging, and death. He witnessed the fragility of life and the instability of everything humans cling to. This universality is not a source of despair. It is a source of connection. It means you are not alone. It means suffering is not a personal failure. It means your pain is not a sign of weakness. Understanding this reduces self-judgment and opens the heart to compassion, compassion for yourself and others. And compassion, once awakened, becomes a fertile ground for positive thinking. But suffering persists because the mind does not know how to relate to it skillfully. The mind reacts to pain with resistance. It tries to escape, deny, suppress, or distract itself from uncomfortable emotions. This resistance is what turns pain into suffering. Pain is a natural signal of life's impermanence and vulnerability. Suffering is the mental story built around pain. For example, emotional pain after a loss is natural. The suffering arises when the mind says, "This should not have happened," or "I cannot survive this," or "My life is ruined." These thoughts create additional layers of suffering that compound the original pain. Buddhism teaches that if you eliminate the mental resistance, the suffering diminishes dramatically, even if the pain remains. This is why acceptance is essential. Acceptance does not mean liking the experience or approving of it. It means acknowledging what is present without denying or resisting it. Acceptance allows the mind to meet reality directly without the added burden of fighting it. When you accept a difficult moment, your mental energy is no longer wasted on denial or struggle. This frees up clarity and insight. You begin to see that suffering is not static. It moves, it changes, it passes. No emotional state lasts forever. When the mind stops resisting, suffering begins to dissolve on its own. To think positively, you must first become intimate with suffering, not in a morbid or pessimistic way, but in a wise and compassionate way. You must observe suffering without judging it. You must listen to suffering without fearing it. You must allow suffering to reveal what it is trying to teach. because suffering always carries a message. It may be pointing toward an attachment you need to release. It may be reminding you of something you have avoided confronting. It may be urging you to grow, evolve, let go, or begin again. Suffering is not random. It arises from conditions. To understand those conditions is to understand how to transform suffering at the root. One of the greatest lessons Buddhism offers is that suffering is often amplified by craving. Craving is the desire for reality to be different from what it is. It includes wanting pleasure to last forever, wanting discomfort to disappear instantly, wanting people to behave according to your expectations, wanting life to unfold according to your plans. When craving dominates the mind, dissatisfaction becomes constant. Even when things are going well, the mind fears losing them. Even when happiness is present, the mind clings tightly, creating anxiety. Craving is a mental trap that prevents you from enjoying life as it is. The antidote to craving is letting go. Letting go does not mean abandoning your goals or withdrawing from life. It means releasing the tightness with which you try to control outcomes. It means participating in life fully while accepting that you cannot dictate every result. When you let go, you free the mind from the burden of craving, and this creates the space for positive thinking. A mind that is not grasping desperately is a mind that can appreciate the present moment. It can find joy in small things. It can remain calm in uncertainty. It can rest without fear. Another mental force that intensifies suffering is aversion. Aversion is the rejection of uncomfortable experiences. It is the internal no that arises when something unpleasant happens. Aversion fuels anger, frustration, hatred, and resentment. It creates tension in the mind and body. It makes you feel trapped in situations that could otherwise be navigated with clarity. When the mind is dominated by aversion, it sees everything as a threat, an obstacle, or an offense. This closes the heart and prevents positive thinking because the mind becomes preoccupied with what it dislikes rather than what is possible. The antidote to aversion is compassion. Compassion does not mean tolerating harmful behavior or accepting injustice. It means responding to difficulty with understanding rather than hostility. When you meet suffering with compassion, your heart opens. You begin to see that suffering is a universal experience, not a personal attack. You begin to soften the harshness of your inner critic. You begin to understand that every negative emotion has a cause. With compassion, negative thinking loses its sharpness. It becomes something you can hold gently instead of something that controls you. Ignorance is the third root of suffering. Ignorance is not stupidity. It is a lack of awareness. It is the tendency to mistake temporary feelings for permanent truths. It is the belief that external circumstances determine happiness. It is the illusion that the self is fixed and separate from others. Ignorance blinds the mind, causing it to react impulsively and destructively. Ignorance keeps people stuck in cycles of suffering because it prevents them from seeing the deeper nature of reality. The antidote to ignorance is wisdom. Wisdom is the ability to see clearly. It is understanding impermanence, interconnectedness, and the nature of the self. Wisdom reveals that suffering is not a punishment or a failure, but a natural part of life that can lead to growth. Wisdom allows you to step back from your thoughts and emotions and see them as passing phenomena. When wisdom is present, positive thinking becomes stable because it is grounded in reality rather than wishful fantasies. Wisdom transforms the way you interpret challenges. Instead of seeing difficulties as obstacles, you begin to see them as opportunities for expansion. Instead of seeing discomfort as something to avoid, you see it as a catalyst for growth. Instead of collapsing under pressure, you become curious about what the pressure is revealing. Wisdom teaches you that suffering has a purpose. It pushes you to evolve. It exposes your attachments, your fears, your limiting beliefs. It forces you to confront the aspects of yourself you would rather ignore. It teaches resilience, humility, patience, and strength. To integrate this wisdom into your daily life, you must learn to observe suffering without reacting to it immediately. When a painful emotion arises, instead of resisting it or feeding it with stories, simply observe it. Notice its physical sensations. Notice its thoughts. Notice how it changes moment to moment. This observation creates space in the mind. It weakens the intensity of suffering and prevents you from being overwhelmed. In this space, wisdom emerges. You begin to question the validity of the thoughts associated with suffering. You begin to see how the mind exaggerates pain. You begin to see where you can let go. One of the most powerful practices in Buddhism is turning towards suffering rather than away from it. This does not mean seeking out pain, but meeting it with courage when it arises. Most of the mind's negativity comes from avoiding or fearing suffering. When you turn toward suffering, you break this cycle. You show the mind that it does not need to fear discomfort. This builds inner strength. It builds self-trust. It builds a foundation for positive thinking that is durable, not fragile. A mind trained to face suffering becomes unshakable. When you know that you can endure difficult emotions without being destroyed by them, you no longer fear the future. Fear loses its grip. Anxiety weakens, confidence strengthens. This shift is profound because it frees the mind from its constant state of vigilance. A mind free from fear is a mind capable of joy. A mind capable of joy is a mind naturally inclined toward positive thinking. Suffering also teaches impermanence. When you experience emotional pain and observe it mindfully, you begin to see that it rises, peaks, and dissolves. No emotion stays forever. This realization reduces the power of suffering because you understand it is temporary. Positive thinking arises from this understanding because it gives you hope and perspective. Even in the darkest moments, you know that the darkness will pass. This knowledge changes everything. Impermanence also teaches gratitude. When you realize that nothing lasts forever, you begin to appreciate what you have while you have it. You stop taking moments for granted. Gratitude strengthens positive thinking because it trains the mind to focus on what is present instead of what is missing. Gratitude transforms ordinary moments into sources of joy. It awakens awe. It reveals the richness of life. Another lesson suffering teaches is humility. Suffering reminds you that you are human, vulnerable, and imperfect. This humility opens the heart. It softens judgment. It increases empathy. Humility creates a psychological climate where positive thinking can flourish because it removes the ego's rigid demands. A humble mind is flexible. It adapts easily. It forgives quickly. It lets go gracefully. In addition, suffering teaches compassion. When you suffer, you understand the suffering of others more deeply. This understanding deepens your sense of connection. Compassion dissolves the illusion of separateness. It reveals that all beings share the same longing for happiness and freedom from suffering. This sense of connection weakens negative thinking because negativity thrives on isolation. When you feel connected, you feel supported, you feel less alone, you feel more capable of meeting life's challenges. Suffering also teaches resilience. Each time you endure a difficult moment and come out stronger, you realize that you are more capable than you thought. This strengthens your confidence. It widens your tolerance for discomfort. It builds emotional strength. Resilience is an essential component of positive thinking because it allows you to maintain a constructive mindset even in adversity. To transform suffering, you must also understand the role of intention. Intention shapes the direction of the mind. If your intention is to avoid suffering at all costs, your life will be dominated by fear and avoidance. If your intention is to understand suffering, the mind becomes open and curious. Curiosity is the gateway to wisdom. When suffering arises, instead of asking, "Why is this happening to me?" ask, "What is this teaching me?" This shift in intention transforms suffering from an enemy into a guide. One more crucial lesson is that suffering becomes destructive only when you personalize it. When you believe that suffering defines you or reflects your worth, it grows heavier. But suffering is impersonal. It arises from causes and conditions. It is not a judgment or a punishment. Understanding this frees the mind from shame and self-blame. It allows you to relate to suffering with clarity rather than emotional distortion. To integrate these teachings, daily practice is essential. Meditation trains the mind to observe suffering without reacting. Mindfulness brings awareness to thoughts and emotions in real time. Reflection helps you integrate insights from experience. Compassion practices open the heart. Gratitude practices reinforce positivity. All these practices work together to create a mind capable of transforming suffering into wisdom. Ultimately, positive thinking in Buddhism is not about ignoring suffering, but transforming your relationship to it. When the mind understands suffering, it stops fearing it. When it stops fearing it, it becomes free. When it becomes free, positivity arises naturally, not as an effort, not as a strategy, but as a natural state of being. Please subscribe to the channel to support this work and continue receiving teachings like this. The practice of inner freedom. How daily discipline, mindful awareness, and spiritual training create a permanent foundation for positive thinking. Inner freedom is not something you find by accident, nor is it something that appears spontaneously in a peaceful environment. Inner freedom is cultivated, shaped, strengthened, and stabilized through daily practice. Buddhism teaches that the mind is like a wild animal at first, restless, undisciplined, wandering endlessly from thought to thought, easily frightened, easily agitated, easily seduced by desire, and easily overwhelmed by fear. But the same mind that begins as an untamed force can become clear, calm, resilient, wise, and deeply positive when trained consistently. Positive thinking, then, is not an emotion, not an attitude, and not a personality trait. It is the natural result of inner discipline. It is the flowering of a mind that has been cultivated through awareness, patience, and self-mastery. Daily discipline does not mean controlling the mind through force. It means guiding the mind, nudging it gently toward awareness, helping it remain present, and training it to see reality clearly. Most people live as prisoners of their thoughts, not because thoughts have power, but because the mind has never been trained to recognize thoughts as thoughts. They identify with every story the mind tells. They believe every fear. They react to every emotional impulse. They become entangled in mental narratives that repeat themselves endlessly, recycling the same patterns of suffering. This lack of discipline creates mental chaos, and mental chaos creates negativity. Buddhism teaches that discipline is a form of compassion. When you discipline the mind, you are not punishing yourself. You are freeing yourself. You are liberating yourself from unconscious habits, destructive patterns, and conditioned responses that keep you trapped in cycles of suffering. Discipline gives you back your power. It returns to you the ability to choose your thoughts, your actions, your responses, and your interpretations of events. Without discipline, positive thinking is easily crushed by external difficulties. With discipline, positive thinking becomes your natural state, independent of circumstances. One of the first disciplines Buddhism teaches is mindfulness of the breath. The breath is always with you. It is the anchor that can pull the mind back into the present moment. When you focus on the breath, You interrupt the flow of negative thinking. You break the cycle of rumination. You slow down the mental noise. This is not mere relaxation, it is training. Each time you bring the mind back to the breath, you strengthen the muscle of awareness. You teach the mind that it does not need to chase every thought. You teach it to return home. The second discipline is observing thoughts without reacting to them. This practice is transformative. Many people mistakenly believe that the goal is to stop thinking, but Buddhism teaches the opposite. The goal is to observe thinking without attachment. When you observe your thoughts as if watching clouds pass through the sky, you begin to see that thoughts arise and dissolve spontaneously. You begin to see that thoughts are not permanent. They are not you. They are mental phenomena. The more you observe without reacting, the weaker the thoughts become. Negative thinking loses its grip. Positive thinking becomes easier because your mind is no longer hijacked by automatic narratives. Another discipline crucial for inner freedom is cultivating intentional thoughts. Most people allow their thoughts to arise randomly, influenced by external conditions and habitual patterns. But you can choose thoughts that support peace, clarity, and positivity. You can choose to reflect on gratitude, compassion, patience, and impermanence. You can choose to see challenges as growth. You can choose to remember your strengths. When you intentionally practice constructive thinking, you retrain the mind to incline toward positivity naturally. This is not forced affirmation, but conscious shaping of mental habits. Over time, the mind becomes predisposed to positivity because positivity is what you practice. Discipline also includes emotional awareness. Many people fear their emotions or feel overwhelmed by them. They either suppress emotions or drown in them. Buddhism teaches a middle way. Observe emotions as they arise, feel them fully, allow them to move through you and watch them dissolve. Emotions are not enemies. They are signals, teachers, expressions of internal conditions. When you meet emotions with awareness instead of fear, they lose their destructive power. Emotional awareness reduces the intensity of suffering because you are no longer adding mental stories to the feeling. You feel the emotion without creating additional drama. This clarity supports positive thinking because it frees the mind from emotional chaos. Another essential discipline is training the mind to rest. Modern life overstimulates the mind, keeping it in a state of constant tension. People become addicted to noise, activity, and distraction. They fear stillness because stillness reveals the turbulence inside. But stillness is necessary for inner freedom. Stillness allows the mind to reset. It allows clarity to emerge. It allows wisdom to deepen. Buddhism suggests moments of quiet throughout the day, not as escape, but as nourishment. These moments of stillness strengthen the mind's capacity to remain calm in difficulty. A calm mind can think positively even when the world is turbulent. One of the most overlooked disciplines is simplifying your life. Complexity drains mental energy. Too many commitments, too many possessions, too many goals, too many comparisons, too many distractions. These create mental strain. When the external world is chaotic, the internal world struggles. Simplification creates space. It reduces stress. It aligns your actions with your values. It allows the mind to relax. With simplicity comes clarity, and with clarity comes positivity. Another discipline that shapes inner freedom is ethical living. Buddhism teaches that your actions shape your mind. When you act with kindness, compassion, honesty, and integrity, the mind becomes peaceful. When you act with cruelty, deceit, or selfishness, the mind becomes restless. Ethical behavior is not about morality alone. It is about mental health. A mind that knows it has caused harm cannot rest. A mind that lives in alignment with its deeper values becomes naturally positive because it is not divided against itself. Compassion is also a discipline. Compassion requires practice, intention, and patience. It is easy to judge, criticize, or resent others. It is easy to focus on faults or misbehavior, but compassion trains the mind to see deeper. It reminds the mind that everyone suffers, everyone struggles, and everyone is shaped by their conditions. Compassion softens the heart. It dissolves anger. It reduces hostility. A compassionate mind becomes naturally positive because it understands the interconnectedness of life. It sees goodness where others see only flaws. It interprets challenges through understanding rather than harshness. Forgiveness is another aspect of inner discipline. Holding on to resentment poisons the mind. It creates bitterness, negativity, and emotional stagnation. Forgiveness does not mean excusing harmful behavior. It means releasing the emotional burden that binds you. It means freeing your heart. When you forgive, you reclaim your energy. You release yourself from mental imprisonment. This freedom strengthens positive thinking because it removes the emotional obstacles that cloud perception. Discipline also includes training in impermanence. Impermanence is the reality that everything changes. Nothing remains the same. This truth can be frightening or freeing depending on how you relate to it. When you accept impermanence, you stop clinging to what you cannot keep. You stop fearing what will inevitably change. You stop resisting the flow of life. Acceptance of impermanence creates emotional flexibility. It helps you adapt quickly. It helps you appreciate the present. It helps you let go gracefully. This adaptability supports positive thinking because the mind becomes less rigid, less attached, and less fearful. Another core discipline is developing patience. Patience is the ability to remain calm in moments of difficulty, to endure discomfort without reacting impulsively, to persist without frustration. Patience protects the mind from negativity because impatience fuels anger, anxiety, and disappointment. When you cultivate patience, you develop emotional resilience. You learn to wait without suffering. You learn to hold uncertainty without collapsing. Patience creates a foundation for positive thinking because it keeps the mind stable. Gratitude is a daily discipline that requires intention and repetition. People often think of gratitude as an emotion, but it is a practice, a deliberate choice to notice what is good. Gratitude strengthens positive thinking because it trains the mind to focus on abundance instead of lack, on presence instead of absence, on sufficiency instead of insufficiency. The more you practice gratitude, the more your mind becomes attuned to the goodness in your life. Even in difficulty, gratitude finds something to appreciate. Another discipline that supports inner freedom is conscious speech. Words shape thought, and thought shapes experience. When you speak negatively, complaining constantly, criticizing yourself or others, repeating pessimistic narratives, you reinforce negative thinking. When you speak mindfully, choosing words that reflect clarity, kindness, and truth, you reinforce positive thinking. Conscious speech is a powerful tool because it externalizes thoughts. When you discipline your speech, you indirectly discipline your mind. Mindful listening is also part of this discipline. When you listen with presence, without preparing your response, without projecting your insecurities, you cultivate humility. You learn to see others more clearly. This deep listening reduces conflict, improves relationships, and enhances emotional intelligence. Improved relationships support positive thinking because they create a healthier environment for the mind. Another profound discipline is the practice of generosity. Generosity weakens attachment and fear. It expands the heart. It reminds the mind that abundance is not merely material. It is internal. When you give freely, time, attention, resources, kindness, you shift the mind from scarcity to openness. This openness strengthens positive thinking because it aligns the mind with abundance rather than lack. Meditation is the core discipline that brings all these practices together. Meditation trains the mind to remain steady, aware, and compassionate. It strengthens concentration. It deepens insight. It increases emotional regulation. It rewires habitual thinking. Meditation is not an escape from life, but a training ground for life. A mind that meditates daily becomes more resilient, more present, and more positive. But meditation alone is not enough. It must be accompanied by right intention. Intention shapes the direction of your spiritual journey. If your intention is to avoid suffering, meditation becomes escape. If your intention is to dominate emotions, meditation becomes repression. If your intention is to awaken, meditation becomes transformation. Intention brings clarity to discipline. It aligns your practices with your deepest values. The discipline of awareness extends into every aspect of life. You can practice awareness while walking, eating, working, or speaking. Awareness is not limited to formal meditation. It is a continuous training. When you live with awareness, the mind becomes less reactive. It becomes more spacious. It becomes capable of choosing its responses rather than being controlled by impulses. This spaciousness is the soil in which positive thinking grows. Without spaciousness, thoughts crowd the mind. With spaciousness, thoughts arise and dissolve naturally. Another discipline essential for inner freedom is self-inquiry. Self-inquiry is the practice of observing your inner world with honesty. It means questioning your beliefs, examining your fears, confronting your attachments, and revealing your illusions. Self-inquiry requires courage because it exposes the patterns that generate suffering. But it also leads to liberation because awareness dissolves ignorance. A mind that understands itself is a mind capable of positive thinking because it is not blindsided by its own unconsciousness. The discipline of humility also plays a role. Humility allows you to admit mistakes without collapsing into shame. It allows you to learn from criticism without becoming defensive. It allows you to grow without ego interference. Humility softens the mind and makes it receptive to wisdom. A humble mind is open to change, and change is essential for positive thinking. Another powerful discipline is awareness of ego. The ego thrives on comparison, defensiveness, pride, and insecurity. It creates narratives of superiority or inferiority. It resists change. It fears vulnerability. When you observe the ego, you weaken its hold. You begin to see how many negative thoughts arise from egoic patterns. When egoic patterns dissolve, positive thinking arises naturally because the mind is no longer entangled in self-centered illusions. Inner freedom also requires the discipline of letting go. Letting go is not a single action, but a continuous practice. You let go of past wounds, unhelpful beliefs, emotional attachments, unrealistic expectations, and the need to control life. Letting go frees the mind from heaviness. It creates emotional space. It allows joy to arise. Without letting go, positive thinking becomes impossible because the mind is weighed down by old burdens. An often overlooked discipline is resting in awareness rather than identification. When you identify with your thoughts, emotions, and stories, you suffer. When you rest in the awareness that observes these phenomena, you remain free. Awareness is spacious, peaceful, and stable. It is untouched by negativity. The more you rest in awareness, the more your identity shifts from the content of the mind to the witness of the mind. This shift is the heart of liberation. It is the foundation of positive thinking that does not depend on circumstances. Another discipline that shapes inner freedom is learning to respond instead of react. Reactions are automatic, conditioned, and often destructive. Responses come from awareness, reflection, and wisdom. When you pause before acting or speaking, you create a moment of freedom. This moment allows you to choose how to engage with the experience. Over time, this pause becomes habitual. A responsive mind is a positive mind because it is not controlled by impulses. Finally, discipline includes maintaining consistency. Transformation does not come from occasional effort, but from steady practice. The mind requires repetition. Just as negative thinking becomes habitual through repetition, positive thinking becomes habitual through repetition as well. Consistency builds momentum. Momentum strengthens discipline. Discipline creates inner freedom. When you combine these practices, mindfulness, emotional awareness, intentional thinking, compassion, patience, gratitude, meditation, ethical behavior, simplicity, humility, generosity, and self-inquiry, you create a stable foundation for positive thinking. This foundation is not fragile. It does not collapse when life becomes difficult. It is rooted in wisdom, awareness, and inner discipline. Positive thinking, in the Buddhist sense, is not about forcing yourself to feel good. It is about cultivating a mind that naturally inclines toward clarity, kindness, and peace. It is about creating internal conditions that allow positivity to arise spontaneously. It is about freeing the mind from the causes of suffering and training it to see reality with wisdom. When you practice these disciplines daily, inner freedom becomes your default state. You no longer depend on external circumstances for happiness. You no longer fear the challenges of life. You no longer collapse under emotional storms. You no longer believe every negative thought. You become grounded, centered, and resilient. You become capable of seeing beauty even in difficulty. You become a source of calm for yourself and for others. This is the highest expression of positive thinking, a mind that is free. Please subscribe to the channel to support this work and continue receiving teachings like this.